Last year, an average mid-sized fast food franchise lost over $1.5 million.
Yeah, it's a completely wild number.
Right. But they didn't lose it to a bad marketing campaign or a fire or, I don't know, a sudden spike in beef prices. That $1.5 million just silently evaporated out the back door simply because their employees kept quitting.
Exactly. It's invisible bleed.
So if dealing with standard employee turnover costs millions, how on earth is it possible that you can pull up to a window and buy a hot cheeseburger for under $3?
It's a paradox, honestly. I
Yeah.
mean, the economics of it really shouldn't work. If you run a traditional business, that kind of turnover would bankrupt you in a month.
Like a week, probably.
Yeah, exactly. But in this specific industry, the math checks out because, well, the burger isn't actually the product.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
If you are listening to this because you're dreaming of opening a new restaurant, or if you're trying to scale a business, or honestly, if you're just endlessly fascinated by how massive, complex operations run like absolute clockwork, you are in the exact right place.
You definitely are.
We are looking at a massive stack of research today focused entirely on fast food operational systems analysis. And our mission is singular. We are extracting the ultimate operational blueprint for throughput and efficiency. We're using the biggest global fast food chains as our case studies.
It's a completely different way of looking at the world, really, because usually we have this romanticized image of a restaurant.
Oh, for sure, the whole culinary ballet thing.
Right, you picture a brilliant, slightly chaotic head chef tasting sauces, yelling orders. It's artisanal.
But if you want to survive a Friday lunch rush with a line of 50 cars out the door, you cannot rely on culinary ballet. You have to reframe your entire worldview. These major chains do not operate as kitchens. They are high-velocity manufacturing plants that just happen to produce perishable organic matter. By the end of this deep dive, you're going to see exactly why the actual quality of the food is completely secondary to the quality of the system that produces it.
It's all about the system.
Right, because if you want throughput, you don't need magic. You need math.
Exactly. Before you even sign a lease for a new business, you have to decide what your identity is. Like, are you a culinary artist or are you an industrial engineer?
You can't be both.
Not at scale. At a certain scale, you absolutely cannot be both.
Well,
The research we're looking at highlights a concept from a sociologist named George Ritzer. He called it McDonaldization.
which, sounds like a derogatory term, but academically it's a very specific operational framework.
It is, yeah. It's the idea of cultural homogenization, driven by four incredibly rigid pillars: efficiency, calculability, predictability, and control.
So taking the soul out of the kitchen.
Pretty much. Taking the spontaneous soul out and replacing it with a ruthless stopwatch. But what's really fascinating is that this framework didn't start with McDonald's at all.
Right. If we want to trace the real genesis of this, we have to rewind over a century. Back to the 1920s, a company called White Castle, Billy Ingram and Walt Anderson.
1921, to be exact. And you really have to understand the context of the 1920s. The American public did not trust ground beef.
Because of Upton Sinclair, right?
Exactly. He had written The Jungle not too long before, exposing the absolute horrors of the meatpacking industry. A hamburger was considered low-tier, unsanitary street food. You bought it at a carnival, and you took a massive gamble on your life.
So if you're Ingram and Anderson, you're not just trying to sell a burger, you're trying to sell trust.
Right. And they realized you can't build trust if every single cook is doing things differently. They were the very first to say, we have to apply strict manufacturing principles to a commercial kitchen.
They absolutely standardized the environment. I mean, they built these small buildings out of white enamel and stainless steel. It wasn't just an aesthetic choice, right?
No, it was a profound psychological cue. White enamel looks like a hospital. It screams clinical sterility to a public terrified of foodborne illness.
And they didn't stop at the architecture. They went completely unhinged on vertical integration.
Oh, they owned everything.
Yeah, they didn't just smash beef on a grill. They owned the meat processing plants so they could control the exact fat-to-lean ratio. They owned the bakeries so they could control the exact crumb density of the buns.
They even manufactured the physical buildings themselves.
It's wild. They stripped away all human variation to create perfect portion control. They basically trained the American public to trust a faceless system rather than the individual cook wearing the apron.
It was a monumental shift in consumer psychology. But White Castle was just laying the tracks, the true operational revolution, the moment that permanently industrialized human appetite. That didn't happen until 1948 in San Bernardino, California.
Dick and Mac McDonald.
Yes, and what people often miss is that the McDonald brothers already had a highly successful business.
Right, a massive drive-in.
Exactly. They ran a booming drive-in restaurant. It was popular, it was packed, but behind the scenes, their profit margins were totally collapsing.
Because the drive-in model was fundamentally flawed. You had an enormous menu with barbecue and hot dogs. You had constantly broken dishware, stolen silverware, and you had car hops, the wait staff on roller skates, who were painfully slow.
So the brothers do something that most business owners would never, ever have the stomach for. They completely shut down a profitable business to re-engineer it from the ground up.
They engineered what they call the speedy service system. And the brilliance was in the reduction. They fired all the wait staff, just gone.
Yep, outsource the labor to the customer.
Exactly. They introduced single-use paper packaging so no one would ever have to wash a dish or track down a stolen fork ever again. But the absolute masterstroke was the menu.
They took a massive bloated menu and took a machete to it. They slashed it down to just 9 items, 9 highly profitable items, all anchored by a 15-cent hamburger.
By heavily restricting the variables, they were able to apply Fordist assembly line principles to the food. And the operational leap was staggering. They took the average wait time for a meal from 30 minutes down to 30 seconds.
Which is just an absurd leap in throughput.
30 minutes to 30 seconds. And of course, in the 1950s, Ray Kroc rolls up. He's selling milkshake machines. He sees this hyper-efficient, mechanized marvel, and his brain immediately goes to global scale. He takes those exact standard operating procedures and copies and pastes them across the planet.
Think about a traditional high-end Michelin star kitchen for a second. It's fluid, right? It's improvisational.
Totally. It's like a jazz band. The head chef is the trumpet player, tasting the soup, reading the vibe of the room, adding a pinch of salt here, extending a solo there. It's beautiful, but it relies entirely on the unique talent of the people in the room that night.
Exactly. But a fast food system, the system Ray Kroc scaled, is not a jazz band. It is a symphony orchestra.
Oh, I like that.
Right. If the second violinist in a symphony suddenly decides to stand up and improvise a jazz solo, the entire piece of music is completely ruined. You do not improvise. You strictly follow the sheet music, and you let the conductor, or in this case, the machinery and the physical layout, dictate your exact pace.
Okay, but hang on. Henry Ford was building massive, highly profitable automotive assembly lines back in 1913. If standardization is so obviously powerful for scaling throughput, why did it take almost a full decade for someone like White Castle to actually try this with food? And why did it take until 1948 for McDonald's to really perfect it? What took so long?
It's a great historical question, and the delay wasn't technological at all. It was deeply psychological and evolutionary.
How so?
For thousands of years, humans tied food preparation to localized, artisanal survival. Food was agricultural. It was highly variable based on the seasons, the weather, and local culinary skill.
Right.
The massive conceptual leap was realizing that trying to scale food service using human talent is actually a massive liability.
Wait, a liability? You mean being a good chef is actually bad for a chain?
If you want to open 10,000 locations, absolutely. Think about the volatility of human beings. You have wild fluctuations in local labor markets, sudden supply chain disruptions, changing weather, shifting consumer moods.
That makes sense.
Human talent is simply too fragile to rely on across thousands of locations. You cannot guarantee that a chef in Tokyo and a chef in Chicago are going to have the exact same good day in the kitchen. Systems protect the business from the fragility of human nature.
Wow. Okay, so once you accept that paradigm, once you look in the mirror and admit, I am a manufacturer, I am not an artist, you have to literally pour the concrete. You have to physically design a space that actively forces throughput. And the sources detail how the McDonald brothers figured this out, and it's honestly one of my favorite stories in business history, the tennis court usability test.
Oh, it is legendary in operational design. Before they spent a single dollar breaking ground on their newly redesigned San Bernardino restaurant, they took their entire staff to an empty tennis court.
With chalk.
Right. Yes. They used chalk to draw a full-scale, one-to-one outline of their proposed kitchen floor plan right there on the asphalt.
They literally made their employees pantomime cooking. Like, okay, you pretend to flip a burger, you pretend to grab a bun. They ran simulated lunch rushes with imaginary food.
And the entire goal was to spot collision points. They were watching for the exact moment two workers bumped elbows or where a cashier had to walk too far to get a drink.
And what did they do when someone bumped into someone else?
The second it happened, the brothers would erase the chalk and redraw the kitchen counters on the asphalt to fix it. They did this for days until the physical movement was perfectly seamless.
That is just brilliant.
In modern industrial engineering, we actually have a term for this. It's called spaghetti diagramming, which is used heavily in Lean Six Sigma.
Spaghetti diagramming.
Yeah, if you trace the physical path of a worker in a poorly designed kitchen, their path looks like a tangled plate of spaghetti on the floor plan. They are constantly crossing back and forth, wasting steps. The goal of the tennis court was to untangle the spaghetti. And if you look at a modern quick-service floor plan today, it is an absolute masterclass in spatial zoning.
The sources detail this strict separation of zones. You have preparation, cooking, assembly, and storage. And it's not just about speed, is it? It's a dual-purpose architecture.
Right. The first purpose is entirely biological. You must physically separate raw proteins from finished, ready-to-eat goods to eliminate the risk of cross-contamination.
Obviously, yeah. You don't want raw chicken juice near the lettuce.
Exactly. But the second purpose is purely about worker flow. The flow of materials must be strictly linear.
Lean manufacturing calls this one-piece flow. And the journey of a single hamburger bun perfectly illustrates this. Let's walk through it because the precision is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
The whole journey takes exactly 45 seconds.
Just 45 seconds.
The bun starts in a staging area. It moves forward into a high-speed toaster. And this isn't your kitchen toaster, folks. It operates at exactly 545 degrees Fahrenheit for precisely 11 seconds.
And that specific temperature and time aren't random at all. It's perfectly calibrated to trigger the Maillard reaction.
That's the browning effect, right?
Yes. Caramelizing the sugars on the surface of the bun instantly. And they do that so that when condiments are applied, the liquid doesn't seep into the bread and cause structural failure. A soggy bun ruins the product.
It's pure chemistry. So out of the toaster, it slides perfectly down to a condiment station where room temperature ingredients are applied. Then it moves one step forward to receive a hot protein patty pulled from a holding cabinet. Finally, it slides right to the service window. 45 seconds, perfectly linear, zero backtracking, zero wasted motion.
Every square inch of that floor plan is a strategic asset, but spatial engineering only gets you so far. You also have to engineer the actual equipment to solve the biological constraints of the food itself, because organic matter degrades rapidly.
Right, food gets cold, it gets soggy, it dries out under heat lamps.
Exactly. And KFC provides one of the most fascinating engineering case studies on this. If you're running a chicken franchise, frying raw, bone-in chicken at massive scale is an absolute throughput nightmare.
Because it's bone-in. It takes way longer to cook than a thin little burger patty.
Yes, exactly. It has extended thermal cook times, and if you try to do that in massive volumes in a standard open fryer, the cooking oil rapidly degrades, the breading falls off, the water moisture from the chicken destroys the oil chemistry, and the oil scorches, completely ruining the flavor profile of the entire batch.
So how does KFC solve this? Because they obviously figured it out. They turned to hyper-specialized machinery as an operational moat. They use these massive machines called Winston Collectromatic 18-head pressure fryers.
The physics of pressure frying are brilliant. By locking the chicken in a pressurized vessel, the boiling point of the water inside the chicken is artificially raised.
So it cooks faster.
It cooks faster, but also the moisture can't easily escape as steam. This locks the juices inside the meat, and crucially, it drastically reduces the amount of water vapor interacting with the hot shortening. It literally prevents the oil from breaking down and scorching.
That is incredible. But solving the cooking is only phase one. Once you pull 18 heads of perfectly fried chicken out of that pressure fryer, you have to hold it. If a rush doesn't hit immediately, how do you keep it hot without ruining it?
That is where they deploy CVAP technology. Controlled vapor technology cabinets. These aren't just warm boxes with a heat lamp. They are highly calibrated environmental chambers. They independently control the air temperature and the moisture vapor content inside the cabinet.
Which means they can hold their original recipe, which needs a different humidity, and their hot and spicy chicken, which needs to stay intensely crunchy, in the exact same unit for extended periods. It actively stops the structural degradation of the food. It's basically a time machine for fried chicken.
It really is a time machine, and operationally, that cabinet changes absolutely everything. It allows the kitchen to completely decouple the cooking process from the point of sale.
And you don't have to wait for an order.
Right. You don't have to wait for a customer to pull up to the speaker box to start dropping chicken in the fryers. You can safely batch cook huge volumes of food 20 minutes ahead of peak demand.
Okay, I love this, but let me put my scrappy entrepreneur hat on for a second. If I'm opening a new concept, a bad kitchen layout is like a terrible video game level. You're constantly backtracking, getting stuck in corners. A fast food layout is a beautifully designed, high-speed, one-way track. I get that.
Right.
But if I have to rely on hyper-specialized equipment like dropping tens of thousands of dollars on CVAP, holding cabinets, and pressurized fryers, doesn't that completely trap me in massive upfront capital costs? Doesn't that directly contradict the whole lean startup mentality of testing things cheaply?
It's the most common pushback from new operators, honestly. But we have to separate initial capital expenditure CapEx from long-term operating leverage. Yes, the machines are terrifyingly expensive up front, but remember that throughput constraint. If you don't buy those cabinets, you are forced to cook strictly to order.
Right. You have to cook it when they ask for it.
Exactly. And when a bus full of high school students pulls up at 12:15 p.m. and you are cooking to order, your wait times instantly explode. Customers see the line, they abandon the queue, and your revenue ceiling hits a brick wall. The machine isn't just keeping food warm, it is literally buying you capacity.
It buys capacity.
By allowing you to safely batch cook ahead of demand, that $10,000 cabinet allows you to push 3, maybe 4 times as many transactions through your register during your single most profitable hour of the day.
Oh, wow.
That operating advantage generates so much additional high-margin revenue that the machine pays for itself in a matter of weeks. In the throughput game, you spend CapEx to buy velocity.
Spend CapEx to buy velocity. I'm writing that down. That is a phenomenal rule of thumb. But a perfectly designed kitchen and a $10,000 cabinet are completely useless without human hands to operate them. And this is where the system faces its greatest threat.
The human element.
Yes, because in a high-throughput environment, you can't rely on master chefs. You have to figure out how to systemize ordinary, stressed-out humans. And the economics of QSR, quick service restaurant turnover, are absolutely brutal.
The data on this is staggering. The industry average for turnover regularly exceeds 75% to 100% annually.
Wait, 100% turnover. That means if you have a staff of 50 people over the course of 12 months, 50 people will quit and be replaced. You are operating a revolving door.
Yeah, the invisible financial bleed of that is terrifying. The research breaks it down. Losing just one frontline minimum wage employee costs the franchise an average of $5,864.
And we have to look at where that money goes, because it's mostly hidden. Only about $1,173 is hard costs, recruiting ads, background checks, orientation. But the massive hit over $3,000 is in lost unstaffed productivity.
Exactly. When a worker quits, their station is empty. The manager has to cover it, which means the manager isn't managing. The whole system bogs down. So if you run a 50-person staff operating at just 70% turnover, those invisible costs exceed $1.5 million a year.
$1.5 million. Gone.
Yeah.
Just vanished. So how do these giant chains not just instantly collapse into bankruptcy?
Yeah.
This is where the research introduces the concept of de-skilling.
De-skilling is the ultimate economic shield of the fast food industry. If your business model relied on the individual culinary talent of your staff, a 100% turnover rate would kill you in a month. So you don't rely on talent.
What do you do instead?
You proactively extract the intelligence required to produce the food out of the human brain, and you embed it into the system itself. You embed it into the automated fryers, the precise layouts, and the standard operating procedures.
You put the skill into the spatula.
Basically, yes.
It makes it so a brand new hire walking in off the street for their very first shift can reach full operational proficiency in a matter of hours. It completely neutralizes the human capital risk. It's honestly like formatting a USB drive. It doesn't matter who the new teenager is, the system is completely plug and play. They plug into the grill station and the output of the burger is identical to the one made by a 10-year veteran.
Exactly. But to enforce that strict de-skilling across millions of global employees, you need systematized training. You can't just hand them a manual and wish them luck. This dates back to 1961, when Fred Turner, a legendary McDonald's executive, founded Hamburger University in the basement of a restaurant in Illinois.
Hamburger University, which, sounds like a punchline, but it is incredibly intense.
Oh, it is. Turner was heavily influenced by Frederick Taylor's theories of scientific management. He broke the restaurant down from a holistic culinary art form into highly measurable, isolated scientific variables. Today, the curriculum is so rigorous and the operational standards so strict that graduates can actually earn 23 real college credits in hamburgerology.
That is insane. 23 college credits. But that centralized training facility is how the corporation ensures that a regional manager in Tokyo enforces the exact same floor mopping protocols and burger assembly sequence as a manager in Chicago, right?
That's the whole point. They aren't trained to cook. They're trained to protect the integrity of the system.
Yeah.
Absolute compliance, zero improvisation.
But looking through the sources, there is a massive, glaring exception to this rule. Chipotle.
Yes, Chipotle's fascinating.
Because Chipotle operates on a fundamentally different labor model, because they actually require manual skill. You have to know how to chop fresh jalapenos with a real knife. You have to grill raw, marinated steak. They physically cannot de-skill their kitchen because their menu won't allow it.
Which puts them in an incredibly vulnerable operational position. If your process requires manual skill, turnover destroys your speed. Every time a skilled chopper quits, your prep times plummet. So, to survive, Chipotle had to engineer a human resources structure specifically designed to protect their operational pipeline. They built something called this restaurateur pathway.
The restaurateur pathway. It's this highly structured, extremely visible career architecture. They heavily incentivize retention and promote almost exclusively from within. The data from the sources is wild. In 2025 alone, Chipotle executed 23,000 internal promotions.
That internal promotion rate is an operational necessity. By doing that, they ensure that 85% of their general managers have deep institutional knowledge. They grew up on that specific assembly line.
They need that deeply ingrained experience to maintain what the industry calls burrito velocity during a massive lunch rush.
Burrito velocity, I love that term.
It's so good. It relies entirely on muscle memory, knowing exactly how to scoop the rice, knowing the spatial awareness of the line. But I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If de-skilling is the holy grail of fast food economics, and if it saves you from a $1.5 million annual turnover hemorrhage, why on earth is Chipotle intentionally choosing the hard road? Why require fresh chopping and knife skills at all? Isn't that just begging for a catastrophic throughput disaster when a Friday lunch rush hits and your best chopper calls in sick?
It is a massive risk, yes. But it is a calculated risk dictated entirely by their brand proposition. Chipotle's core marketing identity, the reason people pay a premium for it, is food with integrity. It's the visual theater of freshness.
Right. You walk down the line and see it all.
Exactly. The customer walks in and physically sees a human being grilling meat and chopping cilantro. There are no hidden freezers, no microwaves.
So if they changed that...
If Chipotle suddenly decided to de-skill their operation, if they started bringing in pre-chopped, vacuum-sealed vegetables and just microwave their chicken in a plastic bag to save on labor costs, they would completely destroy their brand identity. The customer would instantly rebel.
It would be a totally different restaurant.
Right. The lesson here for anyone designing a business is profound. Your operational system must match your brand proposition. If your brand demands higher-tier manual talent, you cannot ignore HR. You must proactively engineer a retention incentive to protect that talent, or your operational pipeline will inevitably collapse.
That makes perfect sense. You can't promise an artisanal, fresh brand experience and then run a de-skilled, automated factory floor. The cognitive dissonance will kill you.
Precisely.
Okay, so you've designed your kitchen layout perfectly, you've bought the high-tech equipment, you've hired and trained your staff. Now the doors unlock. And the dreaded Friday lunch rush hits. How does a new restaurant survive a massive sudden spike in volume without just completely melting down?
They survive by abandoning intuition and applying queuing theory.
Queuing theory.
Yes. The mathematics of the waiting line. This is the absolute battlefield for throughput engineering. Think about the economics. Rent is a fixed cost. Utilities are fixed. The margins on a single burger are razor thin. Therefore, profitability relies entirely on asset utilization.
Meaning, how fast can you push people through?
Exactly. Every single second a customer is standing in your building or sitting in your drive-thru without paying, they are costing you money.
The research dives deep into the variables of queuing theory, specifically for the drive-thru. We have lambda, which represents the arrival rate of the customers, how many cars pull in per minute. We have mu, which is the service rate of the kitchen, how fast you can hand out bags. And then we have the utilization factor, represented by the Greek letter rho.
I know mathematical formulas can be a little dry, but what that equation reveals is terrifying for a manager. As your utilization factor approaches 1, meaning your kitchen is operating at 100% capacity, the mathematical waiting time in the queue doesn't just increase linearly, it scales asymptotically toward infinity.
Wait, infinity? So the line basically stops moving entirely?
Yes. Think of it like a packed highway at rush hour. If the highway is at 50% capacity, a driver can tap their brakes, switch lanes, and the traffic behind them just flows right around it.
Right.
But if that highway is at 100% capacity, bumper to bumper, one single driver tapping their brakes for 1 second causes a massive rippling shock wave that creates a dead-stop traffic jam miles backward.
That makes so much sense.
The exact same physics apply to a drive-through. When the system is heavily loaded, a customer taking an extra 5 seconds to find their credit card causes catastrophic line congestion out in the street.
Which is why these megacorporations fight so violently for every single second. The sources note that in 2020, McDonald's achieved an average drive-through time of 349 seconds.
That is incredibly fast, but they pour millions into making it even faster because of the compounding returns.
The compounding returns are insane. The research points out that if you optimize a process to save just 5 seconds per transaction, over the course of 12 customers, you have magically gained enough time to serve one entirely additional customer.
It's basically free money.
You literally conjure revenue capacity out of thin air just by shaving seconds.
And the flip side is brutal. If you do not optimize, you suffer from what queuing theorists call balking.
Balking?
Yeah, balking is when a highly profitable customer pulls into your parking lot, sees a massive, unmoving line of cars, sighs, puts it in reverse, and drives to your competitor. There was a fascinating academic study utilizing Pro model simulation software to analyze fast food queuing dynamics in Metro Manila.
The Manila study, I was reading this, they looked at an unoptimized baseline restaurant layout, and the data showed that 57% of their customers, more than half the people walking in the door, were experiencing severe delays. The average wait time was 6.27 minutes, which in fast food is an eternity.
But then the engineers stepped in. They used the math to completely revamp the physical layout. They introduced staging stations to balance the flow of workers, and just by rearranging the physical space based on the math, they reduced the overall processing time by 52%.
Wow.
The severe delay rate plummeted from 57% down to an incredible 8%.
It is literal life or death for the business. But to understand how you actually achieve that kind of optimization, we have to look at Dr. Eliyahu M. Goldratt's theory of constraints, or TOC. This is basically required reading for anyone managing a high-volume environment.
Goldratt's premise is brilliantly simple. Every complex system, whether it's a factory, a hospital, or a kitchen, has at least one bottleneck. And the maximum throughput of your entire operation is strictly dictated by that single, slowest constraint.
The sources outline an empirical case study of a Burger King that perfectly illustrates this. So during normal mid-afternoon hours, this specific Burger King has a customer demand of 198 sandwiches per hour. The industrial engineers map out every station, and they find the physical constraint, the absolute bottleneck of the restaurant, is the assembly step, where they actually put the lettuce and tomato on the bun.
Right.
And that assembly station is physically capped at a maximum output of 200 sandwiches per hour.
Which means during normal hours, they are surviving, but they're surviving on a microscopic margin of just 2 sandwiches. The engine is essentially redlining.
Then, the clock strikes noon. The lunch rush hits. Demand spikes by 18%, jumping to 256 sandwiches per hour. But assembly is stuck. It physically cannot exceed 200. The entire system destabilizes instantly. A backlog of 56 unmade orders accumulates every single hour.
Chaos ensues. The drive-thru backs up into the street, customers start balking, and the employees on the assembly line are completely burning out, dropping things, making mistakes.
And according to the theory of constraints, if the manager panics and says, our drive-thru times are terrible, let's hire a faster cashier, or let's buy a faster grill, it does absolutely nothing.
It is an illusion of progress. If you spend money speeding up the cashier, you are simply rushing orders into a traffic jam faster. You are just creating a bigger pile of unmade tickets in front of the assembly station. You must focus all your energy on elevating the bottleneck.
So how do you elevate it? The sources highlight 3 major lean and TOC solutions. Number 1, place quality checks before the bottleneck. If assembly is your choke point, do not let them waste a single second of their time assembling a burger with a burnt bun or a broken patty. Catch the defect before it steals time from the constraint.
Absolutely.
Number 2, cross-train your staff so they can flex into the assembly station the second the rush hits. Throw human bodies at the constraint. And number 3, buffer your WIP, your work in progress, so the bottleneck never ever starves for materials.
Chipotle provides a brilliant real-world application of this theory with their 4 pillars of throughput. They design these specifically to maximize output during their peak 15-minute lunch window.
Let's break down the 4 pillars. Pillar 1, the expediter. This is a dedicated worker stationed right next to the cashier. Their only job is to bag the food, grab the chips, and get the drinks. Why? Because it saves the cashier from having to move their feet. It removes a micro bottleneck at the point of payment.
Makes total sense.
Pillar 2. The linebacker. This sounds like football, but it is genius. The linebacker is a floating manager behind the counter whose sole responsibility is to replenish empty ingredient pans.
Think about the logic there. If the person rolling the burrito runs out of chicken and they have to stop, turn around, walk to the grill, get a new pan, and walk back, the entire assembly line stops. Throughput drops to zero.
Right.
The linebacker watches the pans, anticipates the empty, and swaps it out seamlessly so the assembly workers literally never stop moving their hands.
Pillar 3 is proper preparation. You ruthlessly shift all the labor-intensive work, chopping the onions, mashing the avocados completely out of the peak hours. You do it at 9 a.m. so no one is holding a knife at 12:30 p.m.
Yep.
And Pillar 4 is aces in their places. You track your metrics, find your fastest, most highly skilled employees, and deploy them directly at the critical bottleneck stations during peak volume.
The result of those 4 pillars is phenomenal. By executing them flawlessly, a Chipotle store can push their peak 15-minute output from 25 entrees all the way up to 80 entrees.
That is massive.
They more than triple their operating leverage using the exact same physical space and the exact same equipment. They even went so far as to build a completely separate second make line hidden in the back of the house, specifically designed to process digital app orders so they don't clog up the walk-up line. They are running parallel factories under one roof.
It's beautiful. But I have to push back on Goldrat's theory of constraints for a second. It sounds fantastic on paper, in a clean, quiet boardroom. Focus all your energy on elevating the bottleneck.
Okay, what's the issue?
Imagine I'm opening a new restaurant. It's Friday at 1 p.m. The kitchen is literally on fire. People are shouting. The fry timers are blaring. There's a line out the door.
Yeah.
How do I actually mathematically identify what my true constraint is in the middle of that chaos? Because to the person working the grill feels like the bottleneck. To the cashier getting yelled at, the register feels like the bottleneck. How do I know for sure?
It's the perfect question, because chaos completely masks the truth. You can mathematically identify the constraint by calculating process cycle times with a stopwatch, but in the heat of the moment, there is a visual telltale sign. You don't need a stopwatch.
What is it?
The true constraint of any system is always the station with the largest accumulation of WIP work in progress sitting directly in front of it.
Explain that.
If you look at the cashier and they have a huge line of 10 customers waiting to pay, but the food is instantly sliding down the chute the second they hit the total button, the cashier is your bottleneck. They are processing slower than the kitchen.
Okay, yeah.
However, if the cashier is just standing there staring at the screen and you look over at the grill and there are 30 tickets hanging above it with huge stacks of raw meat piling up on the staging table waiting to be cooked, the grill is your constraint. You just look for the physical pileup of inventory. The pileup points directly to the bottleneck.
Follow the pilot. That is incredibly practical. Okay, so you've optimized for the rush. You've deployed your linebackers. You've broken your bottlenecks. But moving at a sustained rate of 80 entrees every 15 minutes is inevitably going to cause human error. People get stressed, their hands shake, they drop things, they put mayo on a burger that said no mayo. How do you design a system where an overwhelmed, panicked employee physically cannot make a mistake?
To solve that, we transitioned to a foundational engineering concept developed by Shigeo Shingo at Toyota in the 1960s. It's known as poke-yoke.
Poke-yoke, which translates to mistake-proofing or fail-safing.
Exactly. The philosophy is that human error is inevitable, but defects are not. Instead of relying on a manager to constantly yell at employees to pay attention, you engineer the physical environment so that the error is impossible to commit.
I always compare poke-yoke to going bowling, but putting the bumpers up in the gutters. You don't have to be a professional bowler with perfect spin technique, because the physical system prevents your ball from going into the gutter. The system guarantees a pin strike, or at least forward momentum.
That's a really great analogy. Let's look at a seemingly mundane, customer-facing example first. Fast food restaurants lose a shocking amount of money when customers accidentally throw away those reusable plastic food trays into the trash bins. Over thousands of locations, replacing those trays costs millions.
Yeah, people are so absent-minded.
Right. Now, a traditional manager would just put up a huge, bright red warning sign that says, "Please do not throw away trays."
But people are staring at their phones. They completely ignore signs. Signs do not change human behavior.
Right. So In-Out Burger utilized geometric poke-yoke. They engineered the physical opening of the trash receptacle to be slightly smaller than the exact dimensions of the plastic tray.
You literally physically cannot shove the tray through the hole without breaking it. Mistake proved. No signs needed.
Exactly. But the back-of-house applications are where this engineering gets highly technical. Consider McDonald's proprietary FlexPrep condiment dispensing system.
Oh, this is fascinating. The research notes this was co-engineered with Golden State Foods and Sealed Air. Historically, if you think back to the 90s, employees used those rigid plastic caulking guns or squeeze bottles for sauces, and it was an operational disaster.
It was. You get highly variable portion sizes depending entirely on how hard the teenager squeezes the bottle. You get air pockets that cause the sauce to sputter, making a mess. And you waste a massive amount of expensive sauce that gets permanently stuck to the rigid sides of the canister.
So they invent the FlexPrep system. It uses a flexible, transparent pouch with a specially engineered blue spout. This spout has what they call a frangible seal. It remains completely hermetically sealed during shipping and handling. It only opens when a highly precise mechanical plunger force is applied by the dispensing gun.
And the poka-yoke effects of this one little blue spout are massive and multi-tiered. First, it guarantees perfect volumetric portion control. The mechanical force of the gun ensures the exact same milliliter amount of Big Mac sauce is applied every single time, completely independent of the employee's hand strength or fatigue.
Second, because it's a flexible pouch that rolls up tightly like a tube of toothpaste as it empties, it yields a 10% improvement in product usage over the old rigid canisters. They extract every last drop of margin.
Right.
And third, because that frangible seal immediately closes when the pressure stops, it prevents premature leakage and oxygen exposure, extending the shelf life of the sauce twofold.
Through rigorous poka-yoke, you systematically engineer out the opportunity for human error. But foolproofing the kitchen mechanics is entirely irrelevant if you run out of ingredients in the middle of a rush. This is where we have to discuss inventory logic. Massive chains utilize Kanban and JIT, or just-in-time, systems.
Right. In the old days, a manager would look at the clock, guess that a rush was coming, and cook 50 burgers, hoping people bought them before they dried out under a heat lamp.
Which creates so much waste.
Just-in-time systems eliminate the guessing. Electronic orders from the cash register send automated pull signals directly to the kitchen display screens. The kitchen only produces exactly what is demanded in real time. It massively reduces overproduction waste, but it also prevents stockouts.
But to execute just-in-time inventory at the restaurant level, you have to zoom out and look at the macro supply chain, because scaling this requires absolute logistical mastery. Ray Kroc coined the core philosophy for this, calling it the three-legged stool.
The three legs represent the corporate entity, the franchisees, and the suppliers. McDonald's realized very early on that engaging in aggressive, short-term price haggling with their vendors was a dangerous game. If you squeeze a supplier too hard on price, they eventually cut corners on quality, which hurts the burger, which hurts the brand.
Exactly. Instead, they treat suppliers as deeply integrated systemic partners.
The research highlights the Martin Brower Company as the perfect example. They started by supplying simple paper napkins to a single McDonald's location in 1956. Today, they handle the total end-to-end logistics for thousands of locations across North America. They share data, they integrate their systems. It's a lifelong corporate marriage designed for ultimate stability.
But then you have Domino's Pizza, and they take a completely different, almost radical route. They don't rely on third-party suppliers for their core ingredient. They are intensely, heavily centralized.
Domino's operates a vast, complex network of vertical integration. In North America alone, they run 22 regional dough manufacturing centers.
The reason is entirely biological. Pizza dough is alive. It is incredibly sensitive to hyperlocal variables, the mineral content of the municipal water, the ambient humidity, the ambient temperature affecting yeast activation.
And if you trust 1,000 different teenagers in 1,000 different local strip malls to mix the water and yeast correctly on a humid Tuesday, you're going to get 1,000 completely different pizzas. The crust will be wildly inconsistent.
Exactly. So Domino's centralizes the entire dough production at these highly controlled regional hubs and then ships the perfect dough balls out via a massive fleet of refrigerated trucks. But here is the brilliant economic poka-yoke they use to enforce the system at the local level. Domino's corporate offers a massive 50% pre-tax profit-sharing incentive to their local franchisees.
Like 50%?
Yes. If the franchisee agrees to 100% compliance in buying all their dough, cheese, and supplies internally from the corporate supply chain, Domino's runs that supply chain at a super low gross margin and simply shares half the profits right back to the local operators.
Okay, but I have to ask, if perfect crust consistency is so existentially important to the survival of the Domino's brand, why offer a 50% profit-sharing carrot? Why not just use a massive stick? Why not just write an ironclad legal mandate into the franchise agreement that says, you must buy corporate dough, end of story, or we take your store?
Because if you study the psychology of franchise relationships, mandated costs inevitably breed deep resentment. If corporate forces a franchisee to buy a high-margin product from them, the franchisee feels squeezed. They feel like corporate is just extracting wealth from their hard work.
Oh, and then they fight back.
Exactly. And when operators feel squeezed, they start looking for loopholes. Or worse, they cut corners elsewhere to make up their margin. Maybe they cut back on labor, or they stop cleaning the store as thoroughly. By running the supply chain at a low margin and eagerly sharing the profits, Domino's completely aligns the economic incentives.
They make compliance this selfishly rational, most highly profitable choice for the operator. The operator wants to buy the dough because it makes them rich.
That is genius. Make doing the right thing the most profitable thing.
Exactly. Align the incentives, and the system runs itself. Okay, so let's check our progress. The physical layout is optimized with spaghetti diagrams. The staff is systemized and de-skilled. Errors are designed out with Pokeyoke. The dough is arriving perfectly via profit-sharing logistics. We are a well-oiled machine, but we are hitting a massive roadblock because the final, most dangerous bottleneck isn't inside the stainless steel kitchen at all. It's inside the customer's brain.
This is where operations collide with menu engineering and behavioral psychology. Extensive menu complexity is the absolute natural enemy of operational throughput.
How so?
From a kitchen perspective, a huge menu requires massive ingredient inventories, which increases the risk of spoilage and cross-contamination. But more importantly, from a consumer perspective, it induces crippling decision fatigue.
When a tired customer pulls up to a drive-through speaker box after a long day of work, and they are suddenly confronted with a board featuring 100 different brightly colored options, modifiers, and combo numbers, their cognitive load skyrockets. They freeze. They stare at the speaker and say, hold on, give me a minute.
And those micro delays, those 10 or 15 seconds of hesitation at the speaker box, artificially inflate the arrival to order times. And as we learned from the queuing theory math, any delay at the front end kills total throughput capacity at the back end.
Subway is the ultimate global case study for this. Historically, for decades, Subway operated almost exclusively on a build-your-own model. You walk down the glass line, and the employee asks you a relentless series of questions. You have to make dozens of micro-decisions. Which of the 5 breads? Which of the 4 cheeses? Toasted or cold? Which of the 8 vegetables? Mustard or mayo?
It offered maximum customization, which people liked, but operationally, it completely bogged down the line during a peak lunch rush. You were relying on the customer to act as the recipe creator in real time, which is terribly inefficient. So in 2022 and 2023, Subway executed a massive, highly risky global overhaul. They called it the Subway series, or their signature menu.
They fundamentally shifted away from build your own to a highly curated list of fixed, pre-designed sandwiches. It was 12 specific sandwiches in the US and I think 17 in Australia. You don't have to answer 20 questions anymore. You just walk in, point at the board, and say, I want a number 4.
By directing customers toward a simple name or a number, they dramatically reduced the friction of the order. They engineered the decision fatigue right out of the system.
And there's a much deeper psychological predictability to fast food that plays into this. The research explains that consumers actually seek out fast food specifically as a safe harbor against the uncertainty of their daily lives. The referent pricing, knowing exactly what it will cost, and the guaranteed quality baseline significantly reduce baseline anxiety.
It's all about comfort.
Right. By actively lowering the cognitive work required to secure a meal, these chains powerfully reinforce habit loops and deep customer loyalty. It's comforting because it's easy. I experienced this yesterday. I opened a streaming app, stared at a massive, overwhelming interface of thousands of movies for 30 minutes, felt completely exhausted, and then just clicked on the curated top 10 list. Hitting play on the top 10 list is a psychological relief.
It is a relief. You outsource the cognitive burden to the system. But from a brand management perspective, making that shift is a terrifyingly delicate balance.
Which brings up a massive point of pushback. Customization is the exact thing that made Subway a global juggernaut in the first place. Their whole identity was eat fresh, built exactly your way. Doesn't stripping away that freedom and forcing a fixed menu risk totally alienating their core loyal customer base, all just to shave a few seconds off the throughput clock?
It's a highly valid fear, and many franchisees were terrified of it, but the operational nuance here is that customization was never actually removed. You can still walk into any Subway today and build a completely custom sandwich from scratch. What Subway did was powerfully alter the default path.
To the default path.
Yes. In behavioral economics, the default path is incredibly sticky. Most people will take the path of least resistance if it looks appealing. By visually dominating the menu boards with these pre-crafted fixed options, they subtly steer the vast majority of the transaction volume toward them.
That's sneaky but brilliant.
And crucially, those fixed options are often engineered to be higher margin items. The customer still feels deeply that they have the freedom of choice, but the visual system gently manipulates the flow of traffic to speed up the line and boost the check average.
They didn't lock the door to customization. They just paved a really smooth, shiny, brightly lit road right next to it, and most people just naturally walk down the shiny road.
Fascinating. Okay, we are moving into the technological frontier. Your restaurant is humming, you have broken the physical bottlenecks, your menu is perfectly optimized for psychology. Now you want to scale from 10 locations to 10,000. At that extreme scale, you can no longer rely on human intuition to spot problems. A regional manager can't physically watch 10,000 fryers. You have to turn your food into pure data.
As these massive chains scale into the tens of thousands of units, they effectively cease to be field service companies. They transform into massive data logistics companies. Domino's Pizza is, without a doubt, the ultimate example of this transformation.
Domino's went from a struggling, almost dying legacy brand in the late 2000s to an absolute Wall Street tech giant. And they did it using data logistics. They built a proprietary POS point-of-sale tracking system called Pulse. Pulse logs absolutely everything in the store in real time. It tracks exactly how many seconds it takes to stretch a dough ball. It tracks exact oven flow times. It tracks driver dispatch metrics down to the GPS coordinates.
So no more guessing.
Exactly. It completely takes the guesswork out of managing a chaotic Friday night shift. The manager stares at a digital dashboard, and they can make preemptive labor adjustments before a physical bottleneck even forms.
They track the exact lifespan of a pizza. From the millisecond it exits the 450-degree oven to exactly how many seconds it sits, degrading on the warming rack waiting for a driver to grab it.
And they continually push the tech further. They now utilize Microsoft Azure OpenAI voice automation to take phone orders.
Which is huge, because if the phone rings during a massive Friday dinner rush, and a cook has to stop making a pizza, wipe the flour off their hands, and answer the phone, that completely breaks the one-piece flow throughput.
It tells the flow.
The AI handles the call, understands complex accents, allows the customer to change their mind mid-sentence, and silently routes that data directly to the prep screens. It ensures zero lost revenue from unanswered calls, and the kitchen never breaks stride. And because Domino's has aggregated all this highly granular spatial and delivery data, they initiated a hyper-aggressive real estate strategy called fortressing.
Fortressing is a highly counterintuitive, almost aggressive strategy. It involves intentionally building brand new store locations in incredibly close proximity to your existing highly profitable stores. You are actively, intentionally increasing store density in a single overlapping trade area.
To any traditional retailer, that sounds completely insane. It looks exactly like self-cannibalization.
Yeah.
Why would you build a store 2 miles away from your best store? And the research notes that Domino's actually acknowledges they take a 1% to 1.5% short-term hit to same-store sales when they do this. The existing store loses a little revenue.
But the genius is in the macro system leverage.
It's exactly like playing Monopoly. Putting hotels on Baltic and Mediterranean avenues isn't about owning the most expensive, prestigious board pieces. It's about owning the highest density of spaces in a row so that you capture absolutely everyone walking past and nobody else can land there.
Precisely. By aggressively shrinking the delivery radius for each individual store, you drastically lower the marginal cost of every single delivery. The food spends far less time in transit, which means it arrives hotter, so customer satisfaction scores go up. The drivers drive fewer miles, so they can complete significantly more round trips per hour, which solves a major labor bottleneck. Furthermore, it effectively locks out competing pizza chains from securing prime real estate in that zone.
It's an invisible moat.
It is. And crucially, it captures highly profitable walk-in, carry-out orders from people who live close by but refuse to pay delivery fees.
You willingly sacrifice 1% of top-line sales at one store to completely dominate the logistical map of the entire city. Amazing. Now, McDonald's applies this same data-driven aggression, but they deploy it directly at the drive-thru. They spent over $100 million acquiring an artificial intelligence tech company called Dynamic Yield.
The dynamic yield technology interfaces directly with their digital drive-through menu boards. It actively alters the visual display in real time based on algorithmic predictions.
It looks at the local weather. If it's raining, it pushes hot coffee. It looks at the time of day. But most importantly, it taps into the cameras to look at the exact length of the drive-through queue in that specific moment. If the queue is running dangerously long and the algorithm detects that kitchen throughput is threatened, the AI automatically hides complex, slow-prep items from the digital board. It just removes them.
Yep, they just vanish.
Instead, it pushes high-margin, lightning-fast items, like pre-batch cold beverages or fries that are already in the basket.
It artificially speeds up the kitchen's capacity by altering consumer demand on the fly.
But let me challenge this. Let me put on the hat of the consumer. Is McDonald's Dynamic Yield AI borderline deceptive? Hiding menu items from a customer just because your kitchen is stressed out feels like a bait and switch. Does this fundamentally break customer trust? If I pull up wanting a highly specific artisan chicken sandwich, but the AI hides it to psychologically manipulate me into buying a fast soda, isn't that crossing an ethical line in retail?
It's a valid concern, but you have to look at it strictly through the lens of frictionless commerce. What is the consumer's primary overriding desire when pulling into a fast food drive-thru? It is speed. It is not comprehensive choice.
Okay, fair.
The AI is not actually denying them the chicken sandwich if they explicitly ask for it. The item still exists on the POS system. Rather, the AI is actively curating the visual environment to reduce friction. It mutually benefits the customer's deepest desired outcome, which is getting out of that line fast, and the kitchen's desperate need for operational survival. It's not deception. It's a localized, real-time demand-shaping tool.
Demand shaping. You aren't forcing them. You are shaping the environment so they choose the fast path. Wow. Okay, so we have built the ultimate data-driven machine. But machines break. This brings us to our final area of analysis, the limits of the machine, scalability and failure states. Because highly rigid systems allow for exponential global scale, but they are a massive double-edged sword. When massive, highly calibrated systems misalign with macroeconomic reality, the financial and reputational damage isn't just a bad week of sales, it is catastrophic.
To understand the failure state, let's start by outlining the perfect scalability model, which brings us back to Subway. We mentioned their menu psychology, but their real estate model is what allowed them to explode to tens of thousands of locations globally. They utilize what is called a low CapEx model, low capital expenditure.
Right. Because Subway doesn't have deep fryers, and they don't have massive flat-top grills cooking raw beef. That means they do not need those incredibly massive, expensive, complex grease ventilation hoods installed in the ceiling. Because they lack that heavy machinery, they can squeeze a fully operational Subway restaurant into a tiny 400-square-foot non-traditional real estate space.
Airport terminals, gas stations, hospital cafeterias, college dorms.
Exactly. It drastically lowers the financial barrier for multi-unit operators to just print new locations. They can build a Subway almost anywhere for a fraction of the cost of McDonald's.
But that incredible agility heavily relies on the corporate entity and the local franchisees being perfectly aligned on unit economics. And when corporate marketing completely disconnects from operational realities on the ground, the system implodes. The research highlights Subway's disastrous 2020 attempt to aggressively revive their famous $5 footlong promotion.
Yeah, looking at the data from 2020, Subway corporate tried to push the $5 footlong to boost sagging pandemic foot traffic. But the macroeconomic reality had violently shifted since that jingle first aired years prior. Ingredient costs for turkey and cheese were way up. Minimum wage labor costs were up. The promotion completely broke the fundamental unit economics at the local store level.
It led to a massive, highly publicized 75% franchise revolt. Because selling a high-volume product at a negative gross margin doesn't save your business, it just rapidly accelerates your bankruptcy.
It's like a CEO standing on a stage publicly promising millions of customers a luxury car for the price of a bicycle, and then turning around and forcing the factory workers to pay the difference out of their own pockets. Workers rebel. The system violently rejects it. Scale cannot fix negative margins.
And the failures go far beyond just financial margins. There are catastrophic risks of operational failures in food safety.
Right. When you are operating thousands of locations, a tiny breakdown in biological zoning, someone using the wrong cutting board, or a CVAP cabinet failing to hold temperature, doesn't just make one person sick. It triggers massive, widespread foodborne illness outbreaks, or FBIs.
The research points out that emerging chains, specifically Vietnamese chains expanding globally, have identified this biological risk as their ultimate systemic vulnerability. They are utilizing strict ESG criteria and highly advanced AI-driven camera monitoring to ensure compliance. They know that a single instance of localized staff negligence in one kitchen can instantly become a national viral brand crisis.
And finally, there are systemic labor failures. Looking at the broader industry dynamics, we see things like the California Fast Recovery Act. The data plainly shows that when giant franchisors exert intense, relentless pressure for cost reductions without providing adequate systemic support or realistic pricing flexibility, it can lead to deeply unsafe labor conditions at the store level. That inevitably triggers massive regulatory and legislative corrections. The state government literally have to step in to fix the system.
Which ultimately transfers immense legal and compliance costs right back to the corporate entities themselves. You cannot out-engineer basic labor economics forever.
But looking back at Subway's low capex model specifically, the fact that they can squeeze into any 400 square foot space for a relatively low startup cost, does that incredibly low financial barrier to entry actively attract inexperienced or undercapitalized operators? People who just want to buy a business but don't know how to run one. And doesn't that ultimately degrade the consistency and the integrity of the overall brand system over a decade?
It absolutely can, and it ties back to the absolute non-negotiable necessity of corporate alignment. A highly decentralized franchise system is ultimately only as strong as its weakest operator. If the corporate entity prioritizes rapid real estate expansion, just putting dots on a map over rigorous operational support, intensive training, and realistic unit economics, the system implodes from the inside out.
Yeah, you lose control.
You can have the best, most mathematically perfect 400 square foot layout in the world, but if the local operator can't make a profit, they stop cleaning the floors. They hire cheaper, worse labor. The system degrades.
It's a beautifully engineered house of cards built entirely on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. The math has to reflect reality.
All right, let's bring this massive journey all together for the listener. We've covered an enormous amount of ground today, from White Castle in the 1920s to AI voice bots in the 2020s. If you are listening to this and you are opening a new restaurant, or honestly, if you are managing any complex process, business, or digital pipeline, here is the core thesis to walk away with. The secret family recipe, the brilliant marketing campaign, or the initial talent of your founding team, that gets people in the door exactly once.
Just once.
But it is the invisible, relentless operational discipline, the math, the poke yoke, the queuing theory, the rigorous systems that guarantees they get exactly what they expect flawlessly every single time and brings them back forever. You have to build the machine.
Human talent is fragile. Systems scale.
Talent is fragile. Systems scale. I love that. But I want to leave everyone listening with a final, slightly provocative thought experiment to mull over, building directly on that McDonald's AI menu technology we talked about. We've seen how AI can already gently manipulate a drive-through menu to hide slow items when the kitchen is stressed out. But if algorithms are already controlling the visibility of the food based on operational stress, how long until fast food pricing becomes entirely dynamic?
Like surge pricing for a burger.
Exactly. Imagine pulling up to a drive-thru and the price of a double cheeseburger continuously surges and drops in real time, tick by tick, dictated entirely by the exact temperature of the fryers, the length of the line, and the immediate heartbeat of the kitchen. A burger costs $3 at 11:30 a.m., but hits $6.50 at 12:15 p.m. when the line is out the door. Think about that the next time you are sitting in your car waiting in line and you see the digital menu subtly flicker. Remember, you aren't waiting for a chef. You're actively participating inside a high-velocity manufacturing plant. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep optimizing.